Welcome everyone who's joining us for this webinar. We're about to get started. My name is Mari Margill. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Democratic and Environmental Rights. And we really appreciate everyone joining us for this important webinar on the release of a new local ordinance called the Children's Environmental Bill of Rights with our partner group, Non-Toxic Neighborhoods. So here at the Center for Democratic and Environmental Rights, or CDER, we're working on advancing democratic rights and environmental rights of both humans and nature. And we're working at the local, national level in the United States and in countries around the world. We work with partnership with tribal nations as well. You're welcome to check out some of our prior webinars, which have focused on everything from Sweden and Switzerland to Florida, to Ecuador, to the work that tribal nations are doing, much, much more. And you can check all of that out on social media, on our website, sign up for our newsletter, and you'll get access to those and other recordings, including this one today. And so we'll include some of that information in the chat box, so feel free to check all of that out. So today, we are co-hosting this webinar with our friends at Non-Toxic Neighborhoods, who've dedicated themselves to helping cities, counties, school districts, and universities across the United States to stop using synthetic pesticides and to transition them to organic and regenerative management. They're the leading national organization in the United States working to make these kinds of changes, and we're really quite proud to be partnering with them, both for this launch of the Children's Environmental Bill of Rights, as well as other projects across the United States. So we're going to include contact information for them as well in the chat box, so you can check them out, their social media, their website, and all of that good stuff. So we have a terrific set of speakers for you today, and so I just want to provide a few household details before we jump in. First, we're asking everyone to stay muted so that we can hear our speakers really clearly. And with that, we are recording today's video session, and then we'll make that available. So we want to be able to hear everybody really clearly. So ask that you stay muted. And we have the chat function open, so please feel free to submit any questions that you may have for our speakers. We will have time toward the end of the hour to ask them these questions, so don't hesitate to put something into the chat box. And lastly, as I did say, we are recording the session today. We will make it available up on the CDER website, on our YouTube channel, and social media, and Non-Toxic Neighborhoods. We'll also have it available. So you'll be able to share it with others, watch it again, and so on. So with that, we're really quite pleased to have this webinar today on the Children's Environmental Bill of Rights, where we have 3 speakers. The first is Dr. Bruce Lanphear, who serves as an advisor to Non-Toxic Neighborhoods. Dr. Lanphear is a clinician scientist at the Child and Family Research Institute at the British Columbia's Children's Hospital. He's a professor in the Faculty of Health Sciences at Simon Fraser University in Vancouver, BC. His primary goal is to help quantify and ultimately prevent disease and disability like asthma, learning problems, ADHD, due to exposures to environmental contaminants and pollutants. Over the past decade, Dr. Lanphear has become increasingly vexed by our inability to control the quote unquote pandemic of consumption, the largely preventable worldwide epidemic of chronic disease and disability due to industrial pollutants, environmental contaminants, and excess consumption. He is a leading in this effort and producing videos, including one called Little Things Matter, the impact of toxic chemicals on the developing brain. So to enhance our public understanding of how our health is inextricably linked to the health of the environment. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Bruce Lanphear.
Thank you, Mari and Thomas and Kim for inviting me to participate. My job today is really to talk about how children are uniquely vulnerable to toxic chemicals and pollutants. And to begin with, I'm going to talk about my favorite toxic chemical, lead. It's what I've spent the last 25 years of my life working on. And in particular, what we've found is that as blood levels increase in children, we see, even at the lowest measurable levels, sharp decrements in their intellectual abilities. So there's no safe level, no apparent threshold for the impact of lead on children's developing brain. Now this is really quite remarkable because, like lead, we regulate toxic chemicals, by now of which we know of many, as though there is a safe level or threshold. So we're failing to protect children. In the interim, we've also identified a number of other chemicals, and all these chemicals are widely disseminated in our communities and found in virtually all pregnant women and all children. They include flame retardants like PBDEs, air pollution, organophosphate pesticides, which are readily found in our diets and in our communities, and mercury, just to name a few. And again, virtually all of these can be found in the blood and bodies of pregnant women and children. Now, we've made some progress in reducing lead over the past 4 or 5 decades, but even today, even after blood lead levels have fallen by 90% in children and adults, the blood lead levels in our body burdens are still 10 to 100 times higher than our pre-industrial ancestors. So they may seem low on an evolutionary scale, but they're actually still quite high. Now, one of the other things I want to get across is, why are children particularly vulnerable? Well, first of all, they're often putting things into their mouths, certainly during the first 2 years of life. And we often find a higher body burden of these chemicals in infants and toddlers: pesticides, metabolites from tobacco smoke, lead, PBDEs. So children almost act like little vacuum cleaners. Pound for pound, children eat more, drink more, and breathe faster than older children and adults. And so for all these reasons, we find higher amounts of these contaminants in children. So why is that important? Well, what's going on during fetal development and early childhood is rapid growth. And the brain in particular is uniquely vulnerable to some of these toxic chemicals. One of the analogies I like to use is, imagine how we treat people who have cancer. We give them poisons, chemotherapy, with the idea, the hope, that those fast-growing cells will more readily pick up those poisons and die. Well, that might be fine when it's a cancer cell, but what about when those fast-growing cells are brain cells? And that's exactly why we worry, especially about children's brains. There are more impacts than learning problems that we can see with toxic chemicals. For example, in a national study, we found that children who have the highest levels of lead in their blood, in the top 33% of children, we see that they're about 2 to 2.5 times more likely to have ADHD. We can also find in that same study that children who are exposed to tobacco smoke, that is, their mothers smoked when they were pregnant, were also about 2 to 2.5 times more likely to have ADHD. But where we really saw something happen is the children who had high levels of lead and were prenatally exposed to tobacco smoke. For those children, we saw about an 8-fold increase in their chances of having ADHD. Or to put it a different way, we found that 1 out of 3 cases of ADHD in children could be attributed to lead, tobacco smoke, or both. 1 out of 3 cases. Now imagine for a moment if I had designed a vaccine or a drug that could prevent 1 out of 3 cases of ADHD. I'd be a multimillionaire. I'd probably have endowed chairs being thrown at me. Well, we got a little scholarly attention, but not much more than that, because the problem is we had no way to privatize those benefits. Taking away lead, taking away tobacco has tremendous social benefits. We all benefit. But because our health system is set up like a free market, there was no way to operationalize that evidence. The other thing I want to point to is that many of these toxic chemicals, these exposures that I've been talking about, are concentrated in poorer communities. So in over the Rhine, where I lived and worked in Cincinnati, a child who grows up in that neighborhood is heavily exposed to air pollution, traffic pollution from the highway. They're more likely to live in older housing that's poorly maintained. So they may have lead exposure on top of the air pollution. There's likely to be more problems with cockroach and other pests. And so pesticides are often liberally used, and so they're exposed to pesticides. They may have older furniture that's still leaching out these flame retardants. So what we see in many of these poorer communities is that children are exposed, heavily exposed to many of these contaminants all at the same time. And while it's oftentimes easier to blame their parents or the teachers for not educating them well, what we now know is that many of the differences we see in children's ability to learn and their academic abilities are because of these concentrated exposures to toxic chemicals. I want to shift and talk a little bit about childhood leukemia. Now, childhood leukemia is rare. It doesn't happen often, but of course it's quite devastating when it does. And childhood leukemia is really a poster child for finding a cure for cancer. Over the past 3 to 4 decades, mortality rates from childhood leukemia have dropped by about 85%. So that's really quite a success. And yet, I've done a national survey, hand-raising survey, when I did talks, this is back when I was traveling around the country, over 1,000 pediatricians. And I asked those pediatricians, how many of you would vote to either, 1, increase funding to enhance the cure for childhood leukemia, or 2, increase funding to find ways to prevent childhood leukemia? And I asked them to think about their own children and grandchildren. Now, some of you may be surprised at what I heard. Out of the 1,000+ pediatricians, 5 of them voted to increase funding to enhance the cure. Virtually all of them voted to increase funding to find ways to prevent childhood leukemia. But here's the rub. Only 1% of the National Cancer Institute's research budget is focused on preventing childhood cancers. So there's this real mismatch between what the pediatricians thought and the way we're investing our research dollars. Now, we've never asked that question to parents. My guess is they probably say about the same thing as the physicians, the pediatricians. So too often our solution for these problems that result from exposures to toxic chemicals are new and obviously expensive drugs. Immunotherapy is one of the newest drugs on the market. You know what it costs to treat one child with immunotherapy, one child with leukemia? $500,000. That's not a solution. Here's the other rub. Working with a group out of the University of California in San Francisco, we calculated the percent of cases of childhood leukemia that could be attributed back to environmental exposures, air pollution, tobacco smoke, paints and solvents, pesticides. And we found that 1 out of 4 cases of childhood leukemia could be attributed to these exposures. But almost nothing is being done about those exposures. All of the research dollars, all of the efforts going into finding new drugs. Too little, too late. So one of the most profound insights I've had over the past 25 years as I've looked at the impact of toxic chemicals and much of the work that's going on by colleagues is that most diseases, most deaths, and most disabilities are man-made. Think about that for a moment. When we think about chronic diseases, most death, diseases, and disability are man-made. Now that's both really troubling, for obvious reasons. We're doing this to ourselves. We're following our own nest. But it's also hopeful because if we acknowledge that and begin to address these toxic chemicals and pollutants and excess consumption, and if we begin to regulate many of these big corporations that produce these products that make us sick in the first place, we could begin to change that. We could begin to protect children and the rest of us from many of the diseases that kill us. The other lesson I've learned is that the legal system often plays a critical role in protecting children. Much of my own research didn't become operationalized, wasn't used until Earth Justice or other advocacy groups took that science and forced the government to act. The first study I did as a young postdoc was to find levels of lead in house dust that were dangerous. We said it should be less than 5 or 10 microgram per square foot. The EPA was finally forced just this past year to actually bring it down to levels that will protect kids. That's 25 years before the science was translated. Why what we're doing today is so important, this idea of incorporating children's right to a healthy environment into the legal system, into our Constitution, is it promises to shift those legal protections upstream to protect children before they're harmed. And that's why I'm so excited to be part of this webinar and to begin to interact with people who can take the science and help make sure, either through their advocacy work like Kim or through the governmental agencies, and make sure that we're protecting children, that all children have a right to a healthy environment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lanphear. That was really really fantastic. I am really thrilled to have you join us and advising in this project, of course, and it's a really nice segue into the next speaker that we have to talk about that legal system that you mentioned. And that is the Senior Legal Counsel for the Center for Democratic Environmental Rights, Thomas Linzey. He'll talk with us about this new ordinance, the Children Environmental Bill of Rights, that's being launched, what it means, and take us from the discussion that Dr. Lanphear left us with. And Thomas, please take it away.
Great, thanks, Mari. And just at the top, just a big thank you to Bruce and to Kim and the work of non-toxic neighborhoods across the country in working with communities to transition them to organic and regenerative management practices and banning glyphosate. I think that's we've incorporated that into this new ordinance that we're talking about today, and I think it's great work across the country. So we're here today to launch this Children's Environmental Bill of Rights, and I'm going to pull up the specific ordinance in a couple minutes so we can take a look at some of the moving parts in it. But suffice it to say for now that the ordinance is intended as a local governmental enactment. So to be passed by a city, a town, a village, county, to establish legally enforceable rights for children. So right to clean air, right to clean water. Some folks would think that we have those already, but we don't in the law. Those guarantees are not in the law today. So the question is, how do we develop this? We've developed this, it's ready to move. Community groups are beginning to pick it up and present it to governmental officials. The ordinance contains 3 components. The first is what I've mentioned already, that legally enforceable rights to clean air and clean water, and banning activities or projects that would violate those rights to clean air and clean water. Then it allows residents to enforce those rights through legal action. So we're not talking a resolution here or a non-binding vehicle that a municipality can pass to make themselves feel better. This is actually establishing rights for children, legally enforceable rights for children, and then giving the tools to residents to actually enforce those rights in court. And part of the remedies that are available through that injunctive enforcement in court is to get a court to actually stop those projects or activities or permits that have been issued for things like asphalt plants that may violate the right to clean air and clean water for children within a particular municipality. So that's the goal of the Children's Environmental Bill of Rights, is to build this shelf of legally enforceable rights for children in a municipality that can then be enforced by people who live there. And so the question that we get a lot of times when we launch new ordinances is, how did we get here? How did we get to this place? Why aren't we writing more letters to agency regulators or to the Department of Environmental Protection or to our elected representatives, urging them to do things to fix what Bruce so eloquently presented over the first 10 minutes or so of the webinar. And the thing that stuck with me the most about what Bruce said was that a majority of the disease, death, and disability is all man-made. So why haven't we fixed those pathways? Why haven't we fixed those problems at this point? And the answer isn't very complicated, and most of us can answer it off the cuff, but we don't make the rules. Ordinary average people, community groups are not the ones making the rules. They're not the ones writing the regulations. Writing the regulations are usually the major industry players in a particular state. And we don't like to talk about any of this generally, because the fact is that it makes people uncomfortable to kind of admit that we don't have a democratic system operating. That the legislators that we elect and the agency regulators who respond are basically controlled by this regulatory system or lawmaking in which we are not real players. We are just bit players in the whole process, and the major industries in a particular state are the ones actually writing the rules or the laws. So it shouldn't come as a surprise that we are where we are, because to fix the disease, death, and disability that's man-made means infringing on the decision-making prerogative of some of the largest corporations in the United States. And so beginning back in 2002, kind of from a frustration with this system that we have that's gummed up and not working for folks, that something called a movement for community rights arose in the United States, a rights-based movement. And the focus of that rights-based movement across the United States was really to heighten human health and environmental protections at the local level. So at the municipal level, passing more stringent human health and environmental standards than exist at the state or federal level. Basically freeing municipalities and that local level of government to go beyond what the state and federal government has adopted in terms of human health and environmental protection, to raise the standards, kind of a race to the top, to set more progressive standards at the local level as part of this, what's loosely become known as a rights-based movement. Started back in 2002 around factory hog farms in South Central Pennsylvania. And we all know the variety of human health and environmental harms that flow from these large-scale, vertically integrated, concentrated animal feeding operations. But the first municipalities in the United States to basically pass rights-based laws, right to clean air, right to clean water, those types of laws, and then ban activities based on those rights, were in South Central Pennsylvania, where this invasion of large-scale factory farms began to occur. It then spread to places like New Hampshire, where the issue was large-scale water withdrawals. Nestle and other companies sticking straws into the ground to do large-scale water withdrawals, and whether localities could pass these rights-based laws, which would then ban those companies from doing those types of water withdrawals. And then to Pennsylvania, or back to Pennsylvania, dealing with fracked wastewater injection wells and the land application of sewage sludge, which we don't have time to talk about at length today, but suffice it to say, issues facing communities, unwanted uses, unwanted projects, unwanted activities coming in that would be harmful to human health and the environment. In Colorado, fracking issues. In California, Mendocino County banning fracking at the municipal level. In Ohio, also localities passing regulations, additional regulations at the local level, and also bans on fracking. In Hawaii, regulating genetically modified seeds and genetically modified plants, again, creating that local level of regulation control. In Oregon, attempts to impose bans on aerial pesticide spraying, because pesticide spraying has human health and environmental impacts. In New Mexico, short-lived ban on fossil fuel extraction in Mora County, New Mexico, one of the poorest counties in the United States. And finally, in addition to these community rights laws focused mostly just on human health and environmental protections from a human standpoint, there have been about 36 communities in the United States extending that concept to ecosystems having rights, this rights of nature concept, which we work on, and drafted the first rights of nature laws in the world in a little place in Pennsylvania. About 36 communities, including the city of Pittsburgh, Orange County, Florida, which has become an epicenter of rights of nature lawmaking. Basically, this concept that without nature having rights, we can't actually protect our own rights to clean air and clean water. And that morally and ethically, of course, that ecosystems and nature should have rights of its own. So there are plenty of challenges facing this kind of lawmaking at the community level. They range from, arguments over whether cities, counties, villages, towns in the US have this authority in the first place. What kind of power do they have to protect health, safety, and welfare? And then, of course, you have the major industries who have not just stepped back and given up the field. They've used state legislatures to come in and try to preempt these local laws from actually being enforced. So all kinds of challenges. We deal with those challenges, legal arguments, but all to say, in its most basic form, if we cede that ground, that local ground for making more progressive laws to heighten these environmental and human health standards, we really don't have a negotiating chip in the game. We're turning control back in some ways to this state concentration of industry power that then can make these standards no matter what our communities need or want. So with that, I'm going to pull up the ordinance itself, the Children's Environmental Bill of Rights, which you should be seeing on your screen right now. And just quickly, in the time that I have left, I just wanted to identify some of the pieces of the ordinance. And so we have the whereas clauses, which covered a lot of what Bruce has talked about, that children developmentally need additional environmental, human health protections. Under Section A, you'll see the actual protections. These are the legally enforceable rights. So a right to clean air, a right to clean water, a right to be free from bodily chemical trespass, that's under Section A3. And then every child having a general right to be healthy, which shall include the right to be free from projects and activities which may adversely impact the health of the children of this particular municipality. Secondly, prohibitions, that it's unlawful to violate any of the rights recognized. This template ordinance also has an outright ban on the application of synthetic pesticides like glyphosate within the municipality, because certain activities can be deemed to automatically violate those rights to clean air and clean water. And the note here is that even though this is a template ordinance, there's a lot of customization that occurs in different places. So it may not be synthetic pesticides that are your primary issue in a particular community. It may be GMOs, maybe some other health-related project, toxic waste incinerator, toxic waste landfill. There are ways to customize this down to that specific activity to ban that specific use. And then finally, implementation and enforcement actually allows residents, parents in the name of children, and also the city itself to enforce. So that's Section C, implementation and enforcement, allowing parents to bring actions in the name of the children as the real party in interest to obtain remedy. Remedy mostly under these types of ordinances deals with injunctive relief. In other words, to stop the activity or project which is violating the rights contained within the law. So in a nutshell, very quickly, that's the Children's Environmental Bill of Rights, those three main moving parts for them. And for folks that want to pursue passage of these types of laws within their municipality, there's basically 5 phases to that kind of adoption. The first is having an interest in moving it, and that generally grows from a frustration by communities and people about the pace or who the regulatory system currently protects and who it doesn't. So a frustration with working within that regulatory field. And then we work with community groups to customize the ordinance. Again, this is just a template, can be changed to expand rights, can be changed to expand the ban section on which activities or projects are banned. And then the third phase is identifying the vehicle through which you want to pass the ordinance. A lot of times you will have elected officials who want to pick it up and move with it. Other times you will have to move it yourself through a ballot initiative. A lot of places have the ability for you to collect signatures, place on the ballot, actually go over the heads of your elected officials and put something into law. And finally, there's something called charter amendments. A lot of cities have charters, kind of akin to local constitutions, which you can amend. So again, same process. You collect signatures, put it on the ballot, and then amend the local constitution with the Children's Environmental Bill of Rights. And then fourth phase is running a campaign, actually getting people to vote for it, understand the reason for it, turn out on election day and vote it into law. And then finally, enforcement. One of the most important pieces, of course, is once it's on the books, you don't just want it on the books, you want to be able to enforce it against specific actions, activities, or projects which are facing the community. So for those things, contacting us or non-toxic neighborhoods for assistance in moving forward with the ordinance. And we of course provide assistance free of charge to communities that want to pick this up and begin to move with it. So in a nutshell, that's the Children's Environmental Bill of Rights and process of moving it through passage. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Marty.
Thomas, thank you. That was really informative. And just to be, so for everybody to know that please don't hesitate to contact us if you're interested in learning more about this, how you might move it forward in your community, how you might customize it for your community, and the different steps that Thomas laid out. So contact us. You can contact Non-Toxic Neighborhoods. You can contact us here at the Center for Democratic and Environmental Rights. We have the contact information into the chat. So don't hesitate if you're interested in learning more about what that would involve. So we are now going to hear from Kim Konte. She is the founder of the national nonprofit organization Non-Toxic Neighborhoods. She's also a director of Jane Goodall's Youth Service Program. She's a former City of Irvine, California Community Services Commissioner. And in 2015, she helped to launch a campaign to raise awareness to protect her children and other residents of Irvine from the City of Irvine's pesticide use. She worked with city staff to have the city adopt a historic, organically driven landscaping policy in 2016. Since then, Kim has assisted over 200 cities, counties, and school districts to ban glyphosate while adopting organic and regenerative land management policies and legislation. Non-Toxic Neighborhoods has proven that you can have beautiful parks, beautiful athletic fields, open spaces, without the use of harmful and synthetic pesticides. So please join me in welcoming Kim Konte. Kim.
Thank you, Mari, and thank you, Thomas, for your important work at CDER. We're really honored to have you guys as a partner in this space where, as a parent, I had no idea that it would be this difficult to protect our children from environmental harm. We just want to enjoy our kids, keep them healthy, and through this process, I think, for moms in particular, the moment you find out you're pregnant, you realize that you're responsible for this life, and what you're eating, what you're drinking, what you're breathing impacts our children. And to learn that our children are becoming pre-polluted with toxins like DDT that were banned back in the 70s. Even today, it kind of shows how critically flawed our regulatory system is. And with Bruce Lanphear, he has been our OG advisor, our original advisor. We reached out to him when we found his video that he made on Little Things Matter, because I think it beautifully illustrates how environmental exposures and toxins have an accumulative impact and a synergistic impact. Just from, how our children play. They play with their environment much differently than we do, as do our pets. More, they're lower to the ground, more hand to mouth contact, like my boys, and really kind of how we ended up in this space. They play baseball, and even if they don't have to slide into homes, they're gonna slide into home because they think it looks cool. Not knowing that before we moved to California, and I kind of looked into the pesticide exposure that's the norm for parks and athletic fields, that it's common practice to utilize both glyphosate and 2,4-D on athletic fields. And learning that 2,4-D is 50% of what makes up Agent Orange, I felt like as a parent, I failed. Michael was in 3rd grade when I was woke to this information, and Trevor was 4 years behind him. So at that moment, I realized that something had to be done. I think as humans, we're trusting. We trust that if a city park is utilizing something, that it's been proven safe to do so. Same goes for a school district. So to find out that California, where I thought it was organic and progressive, was utilizing Roundup to mark the track to show where elementary students and my son were to run in a circle for the running club for health benefits. That was kind of my aha moment, how I ended up in this space. We were lucky enough to live in Bermuda, and it was an amazing experience. And as a country, Bermuda had banned glyphosate due to the negative health impacts. So working in California and to hopefully allow my boys to play baseball on athletic fields where they're not getting exposed. Every time they're at practice games, siblings always come to practice and they have their Matchbox cars and the brick dust and they're, in the environment. And then even if you guys are familiar with baseball, when they sweep the brick dust, it's just a plume in the air that everyone's being exposed to. And organically maintained baseball fields, unfortunately, is not the norm. And like Bruce shared, we were discussing mission statements or, the overall goal for non-toxic neighborhoods in this work is that we want to not be needed in 10 years. We want to be able to, shut everything down, because at that point we want to see that every child is protected from pesticide exposure, where they live, learn, and play. So that's kind of how we got in this space. And through the process of working with cities in California, and now we're in the East Coast. Originally, we focused on the warmer regions because the exposure to these chemicals is year round and there's no dormant season. So we really focused on Texas and Florida and other areas to get them on board. And what we do is we share the solution. So we want to make sure that every municipality and school district has all of the tools that they need to end the use of synthetic chemicals. We took it a step further with the school districts, where we kind of realized, working on this progressive pest management policy, that we don't want to just protect the kids out on the fields where they're playing. We want to protect them within the classroom, everything from the custodial supplies that they're using, how they're cleaning the cafeterias, and because it's all accumulative. And Bruce and our other advisors really helped us utilize research that shows kind of where we are in this crisis moment, because our regulatory system is broken. When we find out that the EPA does not test anything beyond the active ingredient, in most cases, they're not even testing the active ingredient. So for Roundup, that would be glyphosate. They actually have the manufacturer test the active, and they're not testing the inert ingredients. So they are allowing products to go to market without testing what what's within that product and how they interact with each other and the synergistic impact between those chemicals. So EPA registration number does not equate to public health and safety in any way. So this whole pesticide push has really kind of brought to light, again, the flaws in our regulatory system and how our children truly are not protected in many ways. And it's pesticides, unfortunately, that's just one piece of the puzzle that's impacting them. And often when we work with the city to adopt an organic land management policy, then the synthetic turf industry will come in. With some cities, we saw it happening almost 3 months after, the policy is adopted. I don't know if they're working together, but our goal is we don't want to play toxin whack-a-mole with our kids, right? We don't want to remove the delivery system of harm with these synthetic pesticides in the parks and schools where they're playing and just replace it with the dangers of synthetic turf. In Irvine, sadly, we have these beautiful organically maintained parks. They're stunning. And now they are allowing cell towers and 4G, 5G towers to be actually within these parks. So you're just removing one delivery system of harm for another. And it's not okay. And it's exhausting. It's like, we work to get all of the supplies, training, we're a nonprofit. We have no affiliation or funding or formal relationship with the pesticides or technology that we recommend. So because of that, we do ask the manufacturers to make donations to get cities online, to show proof of concept, and to get them going in the right direction. So it's the land management, but then you find the cell phone towers, the synthetic turf. Parents that we work with will reach out to us and ask, what is Teflon bad? Yes, Teflon is bad. And thankfully, EWG has an amazing database that shares, sunblock and just other items that have toxins that can end up in your children's system. And they help you kind of make those educated decisions as a parent. So working with Thomas and learning that, while we think we're having this positive impact with over 200 cities, we're also in Australia and New Zealand. We even have a team in Malta. Love to go visit Malta. It's not enough by any means, because especially when it's just the park system. So New York City just passed this bill 1524, which is extremely encouraging, and it's a beautiful first step into protecting the children within New York City that don't really have an escape, but it's just the park system. So it's not roadside vegetation management, it's not open space. So our goal is to actually expand it holistically to organically control all pest pressure, in the landscape and within the city. So with that, working with Thomas, and finding out that 98% of the total glyphosate use, for example, in San Diego County is utilized in roadside vegetation management and not in the park system. So we need to do much more to actually protect our watersheds and our air and everything that the body burden is placing on our children with these toxins. And that's where we discussed the Children's Environmental Bill of Rights, because we can't fight the lobbyists just one by one with these issues. We have to get local control back to our city leaders. They take an oath to protect public health and safety, but in many cases they're limited to actually keep that oath based on preemption and all these other issues that Thomas can speak to. So we're really excited to work on this and bring this forward to empower our city leaders, to empower communities, to, again, holistically get the protections we need in place until our regulatory system is fixed. So that's it for me. I think the Q&A section is really important, so people can ask questions specific to their community, and we can share how we can best support you.
Kim, thank you so much, and for sharing your own story. It's, I know, been quite a journey for you. So with that, we have time now to ask questions of our three speakers, Dr. Lanphear, Thomas Linzey, and Kim Konte. The first question I have here, and I'll direct this to Thomas, is about, with the model ordinance that you presented on, how, the question is, how do we start for somebody in their community? How do we get started? Who do we talk to? How do we get our feet under us, I guess is a way of putting that question.
Yeah, it's a great question, because sometimes it's, it's this broad universe of how do you begin something so big? But the way to begin is with a small group of interested people. Over the years, we've worked with community groups that were, began as 3 people or 2 people who had an interest in doing something along these lines or along the other lines of the ordinances that we drafted within their own municipality. And a lot of times we have this faith in our elected officials that they're going to pick up the right stuff morally and ethically and begin to move with it. But a lot of times that doesn't happen, but I think that's a good first stop. So in terms of real on the ground practical organizing, it means getting like-minded people together within your own municipality, your own city or your own county, and having a meeting to talk specifically about whether folks want to commit time and resources to moving forward with something like the Children's Environmental Bill of Rights. The next step after that we advise folks is to not only continue to build that group, because there inevitably are other people in the community that are concerned about glyphosate or toxic waste incinerators or asphalt plants or whatever the threat of the moment is, that they reach out to whoever they're friendly with on the city council and at least explore with them what it would take for making something like this, converting it into law. And a lot of times what you'll be met with is either city council members saying, well, this is too radical, or we don't want the city on the hook liability wise, because of course, when you pass something like this, the city is responsible for complying with it as well as private entities like corporations. And so you're going to have some default pushback from some of the council members. We, at the invitation of the community, will jump in and push back on the city lawyer, the city council member, whoever is has questions about it and wants to explore it more. Sometimes I think it will run through a city council mechanism or elected officials, but for the majority of time, you're looking at running the initiative yourself. And that means being in a city or a county, town that has the initiative process. So the initiative process allows people to propose on their own without their elected officials becoming involved to make something into law. And it requires usually a petition with signatures. The number of signatures differs from place to place, but essentially allows you to place the Children's Environmental Bill of Rights onto the ballot for a vote, either at a general election or special election, and go over the heads of the elected officials to actually say, hey, it should be our authority, our decision here, whether to pass something like this into law. And then the question at that point, there's a sub question, which is, how deeply do you want to embed something like this? I mean, we're used to seeing human civil rights stuff embedded pretty deep in our law. So, we're used to thinking about the US Constitution's Bill of Rights, and we're used to thinking about our state constitution's Bill of Rights to a lesser extent, but we're not used to thinking about a municipal Bill of Rights. But that's exactly what this is moving forward, is that municipal level rights-based protection. So you may choose, instead of just passing it as an initiative, which if it's on the ballot, people vote for it, doesn't keep the city council from screwing with it. In other words, city council a year down the road or whatever can go back and try to repeal parts of it or change it. You may want to embed it deeper, which means looking at whether your municipality, your city, town, village, or county has a charter, a municipal charter, which essentially gives it more authority to act as a municipality than other municipalities might have, but also can be done by initiative. So you would collect petition signatures. Generally requires more to amend a municipal charter than it does just to put a regular initiative on the ballot, but it embeds it deeper because it amends the local constitution. So it goes a step further than just saying we want this to be law. We're going to embed it in our local constitution. And so you're in a situation where it makes it harder for elected officials to repeal or amend what you've passed, because generally amendments to the city charters or county charters have to be done by popular vote. So if somebody wants to change what you've done, they actually have to put it on the ballot again to change what you've done. So it embeds it deeper into the system. So a bunch of strategic questions there, a bunch of resource and people questions, whether there's interest in moving forward with something and how strong that movement becomes within the municipality to get a positive vote on things. But all to say, we've come to the conclusion that unless we're able to create these new frameworks of law at the municipal level, that we might as well pack it up and go home, because the fact is that there's only so much room to roam with voluntary measures, cities adopting voluntary measures, begging and pleading agency regulators, stuff we've been doing for 40 years. But we're actually in worse case now than we were 40 years ago. From the standpoint of most major environmental statistics, we're in worse shape now than we were 40 years ago when the major environmental laws were passed in the United States. So at some point we have to ask ourselves, what are we doing? And this offers a new pathway, a new front to be opened up to move these types of laws forward. But it takes some commitment and resources and know-how and moving through the process within your own municipality.
Thomas, thank you. We have another question, and this is for Dr. Lanphear. The question is, I'm going to read this, is gradient still one of the go-to quote unquote rented white coats as described in the Center for Public Integrity article that quoted you, Dr. Lanphear, in 2016. Can you name others in the category to watch for?
Yeah, yes, they are still one of the chief rented white coats that big corporations hire to basically manufacture doubt, create uncertainty, and Gradient, Exponent are some of the key companies that will provide those services. There are others like the American Council on Science and Health, and almost wherever you look for different types of problems, you always have to be careful about some of these front groups. They may sound like they're for citizen safety, for example, but they oftentimes are funded by industry. So you always have to be on the lookout for some of these rented white coats.
And
Thank you.
Dr. Lanphear, one more question for you, which is for those of us who may not be scientists, but do want to learn more about the impact of pesticides and other toxins that might be impacting our children or our public health. Can you make some recommendation for us non-science types about where we can go to learn more that would be somewhat understandable for us?
Yeah, and trying to reduce or eliminate use in your community. There are groups like IPEN that think more broadly about toxic chemicals. There's a group called Project Tender that tries to bring together scientists and policymakers, physicians to talk about consensus. When do we know enough about how these chemicals impact children? You can reach out to me if there's other questions you have about that, but those are a few of the groups that are sort of at the forefront.
Thank you. So this next question, it might be our last question because we're reaching the end of our hour. But Kim, this question is for you. You know, as I introduced you, working with 200 different communities and universities and so on across the United States, can you share with us, I guess the question really is asking about like messaging, but beyond that, what have you found to be effective ways to engage with elected leaders or college officials or others to help them, you know, sort of push through, you know, maybe these rented white coats and industry officials who are trying to push pesticides, glyphosate and so on? What kind of messages or voices are really effective in your experience to help with learning for people in the local officials, but also to help them understand the need to really make a transition and take action towards that?
Sure. So we learned the hard way, a lot of trial and error. You know, we never even knew that you could just request a meeting with an elected official and they'll meet with you. You know, so we, in the process of working with these cities, actually formed a playbook just to make it easy for anyone to have the resources. So no one else has to reinvent the wheel going through this process. And once we got a quote and support from Jane Goodall, which was amazing, we're still geeking out over that. And getting to meet her and drink whiskey with her was also amazing. But again, the goal was, after we were contacted by folks from around the globe because of her reach, we put together materials so you knew where to begin the dialogue. So we have an organic toolkit if you want to take pesticide reduction up at the municipal level, within an HOA, homeowners association, with your Roundup loving neighbor, as well as the school districts. And we found that it's best to try and work with the school district staff. It's best to try and work with the Parks and Rec staff directly. We only recommend reaching out to your elected officials if you are not getting anywhere. A lot of times the city staff just simply want to know what the alternatives are. The distributors are really good at misinforming them because they want to keep the purchase orders coming for, you know, the poisons that we're trying to shift away from. And they will, you know, exaggerate the cost as much as 3 times of what it really would be. So We work and train the staff to write bids if they contract the work out. We work with the landscape contractors to train them to make sure that they're getting contractor pricing, because we need it to be fiscally sound for this shift towards building soil health instead of looking at every pest as something that we need to apply a chemical assault to. So within the playbook and the materials, we work with the communities every step of the way, Zooming all the time with the different park staff just to share what they can utilize. We have amazing high-tech holistic plant grazing right now that we're utilizing in California to deplete fuel loads for, again, back to Bruce's point, prevention. You know, so many things we're just focusing on, you know, how to deal with this crisis after the fact. So let's work on prevention, you know, before these fire hazards happen. And the technology, we have solar powered swimming robots that are for bodies of water that just become a part of the ecosystem. It's a very simple robot. We're taking them online in California and in Pennsylvania to prevent these blooms. In Palm Beach County, they just lost, a resident just lost their dog to an unfortunate bloom. And we work with the city of Austin and the Parks Department, and there they lost 2 golden retriever puppies. It was just heartbreaking. You know, these dogs just came to the park to play. They swam in Lady Bird Lake, and because of the bloom, you know, they passed away within a couple of hours. So it's getting the technology to the cities that they can utilize away from these chemicals, because the chemicals are just offsetting and, you know, creating an unsafe balance across the ecosystem. So we're here, we'll give you all the tools, and our team is amazing. Our advisors, Bruce was able to get us an expert to join us for a call with a senator in Idaho from Boise State. And she was, you know, I mean, so we will work to get support where you are locally to fight for everything to protect our kids. Hope that answered you.
Yes, Kim, it does. It does. I think it also just establishes some hope for people to know that you can, there are effective things to do, and it might be different in different places, and that non-toxic neighborhoods provides obviously a lot of resources and helps people through their own journey. So thank you. And that comes to the close of our hour, unfortunately. I want to thank everyone so much for joining us today. Our terrific speakers, Kim Konte, thank you. Dr. Bruce Lanphear, thank you. Thomas Linzey, thank you all. This has been really informative and terrific and inspiring. And to let everybody know, this session is being recorded. It's also on Facebook Live. We are going to making the recording available. We'll get that information to you with follow-up, but you can also find it on social media, on our website, YouTube channel, and so on. We really welcome you sharing it with your communities, your colleagues, and so on. So to stay up to date on this and other events that we have upcoming, news and updates, sign up for our newsletter. You can follow us on social media, follow Non-Toxic Neighborhoods on social media, visit the websites. We also, of course, to help us do this work, welcome your donation to Non-Toxic Neighborhoods, to the Center for Democratic and Environmental Rights. Your support helps us to be able to do the work that we do. And thanks again for everybody for joining us. It's been a terrific hour, and we deeply appreciate your attention. Thanks, everybody.